Okay, so I was working on this wall base here. It's the base of my brick wall for my garage. But it's cold and chilly out today, so I might take a little break. I did all the rotary hammer chiseling here to smooth this out. Then I wire brushed it, but it's cold out, so let's take a grammar break today, all right? All right, I'm inside where it's warm, and I'd like to talk about commas and context as it relates to my study of noun complements. Now, I showed in previous videos many times the 6 base forms of noun complement. All right, now I've already shown how the distinction phrase or clause used as a noun complement is kind of related to the adjective as used as a noun complement. Okay, they're kind of like related. They're kind of like cousins. The distinction phrase or clause and the adjective when they're used as noun complements. Now, I did mention that I don't call these structures relative clauses or adjective clauses. I think these are horrible names. I call them distinction phrases and distinction clauses. You can see that in my previous videos if you want to review it, okay? So today, I'd like to talk about the prepositional phrase used as a noun complement and see if it's in any way related to the distinction phrase or clause, okay? We already saw the connection between the adjective and distinction phrase or clause, but now I'd like to see if there's any kind of relationship between the prepositional phrase used as a noun complement and the distinction phrase or clause used as a noun complement. And to do that, we will keep in mind commas and context. That's very important. Let's first look at the prepositional phrase used as a noun complement. Here's an example. I purchased a bushel of apples. Of apples is a prepositional phrase, and in traditional terms, it might have been referred to as an adjective phrase, but nowadays we would call it a noun complement. That's what a lot of people are doing here in modern times. So you see the prepositional phrase, bushel of what? Of apples. Of apples is complementing bushel. So the second example would be, his campaign speech was just a load of crap. His campaign speech was just a load of crap. So you see, of crap, your prepositional phrase, which might have been called an adjective phrase at one time, but nowadays it's kind of referred to as a noun complement. So you see clearly that the prepositional phrase can and is used as a noun complement, all right? Now, before we move forward, let's review something that's very important. If we're talking about commas and context today, let's review something from my previous videos that's important. It has to do with the comma, all right? Now, I demonstrated clearly the difference between the appositive and noun complement in previous videos many times. So let's look at that. James, comma, the barber is bald. Okay, we have an appositive here. And how do we know that? Because we have commas. James, comma, the barber, comma. All right? That tells us many things that are important. First of all, there's only one James. In your circle of friends or your community, there's only one James who's a barber. Not two, only one. All right? So James is the barber. And this is a non-restrictive phrase because it can be removed and you still won't lose any of the main meaning of the sentence, okay? So that's your positive, and that's how commas are used. Then I talked about this, the noun complement, all right? Now, Bob the barber is almost bald. Now, we see the barber, but we don't see commas, okay? Remember, we're looking for the presence or absence of commas to help us figure out what's going on in a sentence. So we see Bob the barber is almost bald, and there are no commas here. Then there's Bob the electrician. All right, that's different. Bob the electrician has long blonde hair. Now, when you're reading this in context, you're thinking, what's going on here? Well, there must be two Bobs, and there is. There are no commas here. These are not appositives. These are not appositives which rename the subject, all right? Rename the thing that they're referring to. So you see here that in this circle of friends or community or town, there must be two Bobs. One is a barber and one is an electrician, okay? No commas, that's very important. So we have two Bobs, all right? And Bob is not always a barber here, and Bob is not always an electrician here, so these are restrictive. You kind of can't take these out, or the sentences together, in other words, in context, aren't going to make any sense. You can't say Bob is almost bald and then say Bob has long blonde hair. You have to differentiate. So you see here the difference. Bob the barber, Bob the electrician, no commas. So here you clearly see that you have noun complements here, and here you clearly see that you have an appositive. Now we can get back to the prepositional phrase functioning as a noun complement, all right? So let's move forward and get into the good stuff. The Jimmy Green of Trindlecore is not the Jimmy Green of Misty Meadows. Okay, here you have a sentence. The Jimmy Green of Trindlecore, okay, that's a major corporation, is not the Jimmy Green of Misty Meadows. And that's a fancy golf course, all right? So you see we have the prepositional phrase here, and you could say, you know, it used to be called an adjective phrase, but now it's called a noun complement, okay? And you see no commas, right? Keep that in mind, no commas. Now, you're thinking, well, wait a second, the Jimmy Green of Trindlecore, and then you see the Jimmy Green of Misty Meadows. And you're thinking, are there two Jimmys? Remember we just talked about the difference between the appositive and the noun complement. We say, well, there must be two Jimmys. Well, no, hold on. We have to take everything in context. There's only one Jimmy here. Now, how do you know that? Well, you have to listen to the discourse when people are talking together, all right? You have to take everything in context. And that's what we're doing here. So let's go deeper here to try to make my point. Let's say somebody rewords this. Let's say somebody wants to say this differently, all right? So somebody says, the Jimmy Green who heads a major corporation in San Diego is way more serious than the Jimmy Green who plays golf in Lake Tahoe. Now here what we have is we have a long sentence, and we have Jimmy Green, and we have a distinction phrase acting as a noun complement. It is complementing, all right, or completing the thought of Jimmy Green, who heads a major corporation in San Diego. There's no commas. It's a distinction phrase, which you would probably call a relative clause, right? But it's functioning as a noun complement. Now down here you have the other Jimmy Green, right, who plays golf in Lake Tahoe, and that's a distinction phrase, or you would call it a relative clause, functioning as a noun complement. So you see now, when you go deeper, that we're talking about a Jimmy Green who heads a major corporation. Okay, it's called Trindlecore. I just made that up. But the point is, you see what the person is talking about now on a deeper level. And you see here Jimmy Green who plays golf in Lake Tahoe. And I made up a fictional golf course called Misty Meadows. So you see here when you go deeper, all right, you see that there's the noun complement essence. In either way you state what you're stating here. There's the essence of the noun complement here. Okay, now it's a prepositional phrase, and there's the essence of the noun complement in the distinction phrase. So I conclude that they are kind of related. They are kind of cousins, all right? So when you see the word than, okay, in a discourse or in a sentence or a communication, that usually denotes comparison, all right? They're comparing something. Somebody's saying, okay, I'm comparing Jimmy Green, who heads this corporation, Trindlecore. I'm comparing Jimmy Green with this Jimmy Green, who's a great fun guy, who's not serious. He jokes around in Lake Tahoe at a golf course called Misty Meadows. So the word then is denoting a comparison, but it's not comparing two different physical Jimmy Greens, all right? Are there two concrete, actual, real Jimmys? No. No, what's happening in this sentence here, well, this is very important. That's why I showed how it works with a prepositional phrase and a distinction phrase. Watch. The Jimmy Green that we're presented with here, okay, we're given this Jimmy Green, all right? He's given to us in context, and that was the whole point of the video, and in the abstract. See, what you're comparing here is not two different physical humans here. You're comparing two different modes of behavior. Like Jimmy here is real serious, and he's real strict, and he runs a tight ship. And his corporation is successful because of this. Very stoic, very conservative. And here you have Jimmy Green, who's a clown and loves to play and do practical jokes and have great fun on the golf course. So what you're doing is, when you're comparing here, you're just comparing Jimmy Green in two different modes or roles or moods or whatever. All right? So you see, I think it's true. I think the prepositional phrase used as a noun complement, all right, is definitely related to the noun complement when it's in distinction phrase or clause form. Okay? So the point I tried to make was, and it was important to show that there's the presence or absence of commas, and also the things that you speak or read must be taken in context. So the prepositional phrase is a cousin of the distinction phrase or clause when they're used as noun complements. And the distinction phrase and clause is a cousin of the adjective used as a noun complement. Now, that sounds boring and silly and stupid, but this is part of my study, and I think someone might find it valuable. All right, so thanks for being incredibly patient, and good night.